Governments are ceding power to big corporations and the market. People, recognising this power shift, are turning their backs on the ballot box. An explosion of protest. Whether it's street protests against international institutions like the IMF or the World Bank or the World Trade Organization, or whether it's protests focused against corporations, epitomised by a rise in shareholder and consumer activism against the Nikes, Essos, Shells, Monsantos of this world. As Hans Tietmeyer, the former president of the German Bundesbank, has said, politicians have to understand that they are now under the control of the financial markets. Great. Okay. All right. Bye. Bye-bye. Got a computer nightmare. That was preparation for the BBC, for this thing I'm doing on Monday on how the BBC needs to completely rethink its the way it covers politics. And I'm opening the debate with, setting out the thesis that basically we can't think about politics in the old way anymore, because politics isn't anymore about government, citizen. That's the old-fashioned way of thinking about it. And now there are all these new political players like multinational corporations and NGOs and activist groups, and these are all political, and government is just one political player. And so the whole way they need now, and the implications that has for broadcasting are obviously huge. So, because clearly what we see doesn't really reflect the reality of what people are concerned about.
Noreena Hertz, 33 jaar, econome aan Cambridge, schrijfster van het boek De Stille Overname, dat in februari in het Nederlands verschijnt, en anti-globalist. Ze legt regeringsleiders en topmanagers uit hoe het bedrijfsleven de macht van de politiek heeft overgenomen en welke gevaren dat met zich meebrengt.
I'm on a panel with one of the head guys from Microsoft. But I think when I see this Microsoft guy, I might raise the question of why does my Internet Explorer work so badly?
But in the end, we all pay for what Microsoft is doing. I mean, we give them the power, don't we?
By buying their product in the first place. Yeah, but the trouble is that they then, with something like Microsoft, is that they infiltrate technologies to an extent that you can't actually use certain applications. You buy a computer, it's already all loaded on. I know nothing about computers, so for me to kind of un-Microsoft my computer, I wouldn't even know how to do that. So we give them power, but we don't have that much choice, I guess. What we're really concerned about is economic globalization, which is essentially a world in which a very set agenda is being played out, a world of trade liberalization, markets being opened up. It's a world in which the GDP of the Seychelles, $576 million, is the amount that Michael Eisner, the chairman of Disney, earned in just 1 year. Thanks to new technologies, thanks to new communication abilities, corporations are able to move around the globe in a way that we haven't seen up until now. And with that comes a whole set of consequences. The problems with globalization is that the spoils, the gains, the wins attributed to it are definitely not being shared by all. In fact, instead, what we're seeing is a world of ever greater inequality, a world in which the gap between the rich and the poor is growing at some exponential rate. And these are the problems that are down to globalization.
Dit weekend komen aan de rand van Brussel, in het kasteel van Laken, de Europese leiders bij elkaar om het over de toekomst van Europa te hebben. Elders in Brussel bereiden antiglobalisten en mediaactivisten demonstraties voor.
Maar het is geworden een ander Europa voor een andere wereld. Ja?
We hebben gisteren onder andere in Brussel een vergadering gehad, waar we een motie gestemd hebben dat de vakbonden, de NGO's en de antiglobaliseringsbeweging, voor mij T14, dat die mekaars manifestaties ondersteunen.
Dus wij zijn gebleven op het standpunt om de betoging aan te vragen tot aan de muur van het paleis. Dat is het laatste stukje van de muur. Dus Bokstelplein naar omhoog, Avenue des Artistes.
Ik wil niet aanvaardbaar zijn. Hè? Want ik vind dat deze maatschappij niet aanvaardbaar is. Dus vind ik ook niet dat ik aanvaardbaar moet zijn naar het establishment toe. Noreena Hertz is dat zeker wel. Hè? Iemand merkte op, het is een beetje Tony Blair in zijn jonge jaren. En daar lijkt het inderdaad sterk op. Hè? Je kan een kritiek hebben op de maatschappij, maar ze durft ook niet te breken met de logica van de samenleving. En ik denk dat dat daarom ook is dat soort mensen naar voren worden geschoven.
I'm choosing to be optimistic about this engagement because I do think it's constructive to move this debate on and actually enter into a dialogue.
Ze hebben een paar jaar geprobeerd om ons te criminaliseren. Hè. Te zeggen van het is een stelletje ongeregeld. En dat is niet gelukt. Dus dan kan je op twee manieren reageren. Je criminaliseert nog meer en je sluit de mensen in de gevangenis op. Of je kan ze omhelzen en je zegt join them. Dat is wat we nu zien gebeuren natuurlijk.
You can't play to any audience. There are always going to be people who, whatever you do, are going to criticize you. People who you feel are ostensibly are on your side and people who are on the other side. And the important thing for me has been to try and just, hang on to my personal integrity. I see myself as someone who continues to challenge the establishment, but feel very privileged that I'm in a position that I'm able to do it face to face, that I'm able to face engage in a debate with people, and that I'm being given a voice, which means that I don't only have to express my dissent by going to Genoa and being on the streets.
Barry, it's Noreena. I'm doing this debate against the Dutch Minister of International Development this week in Amsterdam, and we're going to kick off. I've just been told they're going to kick off with. So, how was, what do you all think about the WTO Doha? So I know what she'll say probably, but
I think for me, my epiphany really came in 1991 and the beginning of 1992, when I went to Russia. I had had a very traditional neoliberal upbringing. I had studied economics at university, and then I went to business school in America. And, armed with my whole kind of MBA knowledge and my belief about capital markets and the Western world, I went off to Russia that summer. And that was really an experience that changed the whole course of my life, because I ended up staying in Russia and getting hired by the IFC, which is part of the World Bank, to advise the Russian government on its economic reforms in early 1992, and specifically on its privatization program. And I travelled around the country and spent time in factories that were located in very remote places, employed maybe 40, 50,000 people, were responsible for providing schools and hospitals, education and health for entire communities. And I realised that if we were going to promote this Washington-based agenda and privatise all these companies overnight, if we were going to leave Russian industry to the hands of the market, well, what was going to happen to all these people in these communities who are dependent on factories, which in the real world, in the competitive free market world, would never be able to survive? And so I raised these issues in Washington and was told that really this was a secondary issue, because the primary issue at stake was that state assets had to be transferred into private hands in order to depoliticize Russia, in order to make communism irreversible. Well, I had a real problem with that, and quit my job at the IFC and went and did a PhD looking for the next 2 years at a group of Russian factories and looking at really what was happening. I saw that inequality was increasing, that health was declining, that life expectancy was falling dramatically. And I try and bring these issues to the attention of business school students who, like me, really come into business school quite unaware of the world at large. So I do things like make my students watch films. I talk about issues relating to human rights and business.
Thank you for laughing. Very good. Here are the presenters, so introduce them.
Hi. Hello. Hiya.
Anybody outside?
We have a very clear case in Bolivia where the government privatized the water supply, and overnight water prices went up by 200%, and a quarter of an average Bolivian's salary was suddenly to be spent on water. That's an indication of how international frameworks can constrain national governments.
Because it seems that privatizing a water supply seems incredibly unorthodox, and it seems no part of the Washington consensus that public utilities and all sort of public administration should immediately be privatized. And so it seems to me that that case actually shows that states can sort of do wild things whenever they want.
To your question, you're wrong.
The easiest way to look at this point is, I think, what's happening now with the World Trade Organization, which essentially was an organization whose remit was to promote free trade and has now extended and is planning to extend this remit into 4 areas, all of which are going to affect nation-states' abilities to do things. One is investment. Was it tomorrow you were talking about? I'm in Amsterdam tomorrow. So, yeah. So, all right, bye-bye. Channel 4.
What did they want?
To go on some program tomorrow talking about why politics doesn't matter. Does politics matter? Does politics matter? It's very strange to be being seen as, to quote the Times newspaper, one of the generals of the anti-globalization movement, when as a movement we have no official leaders. This movement has been really misunderstood in terms of being called an anti-globalization movement. It's a movement that actually is for some really fundamental things, for justice, for equity, and for, I think, ultimately, democracy. And the way I frame the issue, I guess, is in terms of exclusion. I see that that's what we unite around, a real concern that a chasm is growing between, on the one hand, social justice, and on the other, the global economy. That this is increasingly a world of extremes, a world of haves and have-nots, a world of gated communities next to ghettos, and a world of exclusion.
Oké, dat is goed. Ja. Dag, tot ziens. Ja.
Je hebt echt alle nieuwe apparaten, maak je gebruik van, zo te zien.
Ah ja, waarom niet, hè? Ah ja, dat is, hoe moet je het zeggen? We zijn niet tegen vooruitgang, hè. Je maakt gebruik van die nieuwe technologie op een eigen manier en je doet er andere dingen mee dan waar ze voor gemaakt zijn. Dat vind ik wel het fantastische aan waar we mee bezig zijn. Ja, dat je ook toont dat je met die technologie totaal andere dingen kan doen waar het eigenlijk voor bedoeld is. Het is bedoeld om op een bepaalde manier met media om te gaan. En we gaan er op een andere manier mee om. En dat is wel het leuke. Ook het internet is een goed voorbeeld. Hè. Ik denk dat we eigenlijk proberen we hier moet je een platform te creëren waar mensen een verhaal op kunnen vertellen. Dus een platform waar mensen een verhaal, mensen die in strijd zijn, die in beweging zijn, dat zij een verhaal kwijt kunnen. Dus we hebben een team van mensen die zelf ook wil publiceren, die zelf een verhaal heeft te vertellen. Maar we vinden het vooral belangrijk dat dat een open kanaal is waar mensen eigenlijk zelf kunnen vertellen waarom ze in beweging komen, waarom ze in verzet komen en wat ze vinden wat er misgaat in de wereld.
Maar zijn jullie nou tegen globalisering?
Nee, er is niemand van ons die zich uitspreekt tegen globalisering natuurlijk. Je hebt een paar gekke nationalisten, maar er is niet, ik denk dat die zelfs geen plaats vinden binnen deze beweging of niet aanvaard worden binnen de beweging. Merendeel is niet tegen globalisering op zich, maar de manier waarop die loopt. Hij zegt, ja, winst moet centraal staan, alles moet om geld draaien, moet om winst draaien in de eerste plaats. En dat je een maatschappij hebt dat we eigenlijk zeggen, daar is iets mis en het moet veranderen. Je moet de mens centraal zetten. Het is de mens die op de eerste plaats moet komen. Ik denk dat dat wat de gemene deler is die je vindt binnen heel de beweging. Zelf zou ik zeggen, ik ben tegen kapitalistische globalisering, omdat ik ook mijn maatschappij op zich wil bevragen. Ik denk dat het tijd is om iets anders uit te proberen.
Maar waar geloof je wel in dan?
Dat weet ik niet zo, dat vind ik ook niet nodig. Ik moet niet alle antwoorden hebben. We zullen wel samen doorheen ons verzet antwoorden vinden.
I guess I grew up in a home where drummed into me from the day I was born was the fact that I had a responsibility to make a positive contribution in this world. And if you have that message, I think from a really young age, you actually see it as quite immoral not to do that. And so in whatever way you can, and of course there are lots of ways one can, mothers who stay at home and look after their kids, are also making their children's lives better, and I think are driven by that agenda. But I guess I've got an opportunity to do things on a bit of a bigger scale right now. So.
Do you want to have children?
With the right guy, yeah. It would have to be with the right guy, yeah. And when I've got a bit more time.
Yeah, because this way you're not going to find yourself a guy, are you?
Don't say that. Do not say that.
Noreena Hertz gaat in debat met minister Herfkens van Ontwikkelingssamenwerking. Een van de agendapunten is de uitkomst van de onlangs gehouden Wereldhandelsconferentie in Doha, Qatar.
And the big good news of Doha is actually the Declaration on Trips and Medicines. I've been in this work for, a quarter of a century. I've never seen, within 3 years, a problem tabled, a problem solved. Then on export subsidies, the Dutch position has been already 3 years ago
export
to Seattle on agriculture. Yeah. The language is wishy-washy, but at least it's on the agenda. So that's a mixed bag. But the real good news is that for the first time Africa was able to put their feet down and say, okay, or their fist on the table.
What I am very concerned about more generally is the whole way the process took place. It was a very, very unfair process. There are stories about...
Process, you mean the negotiation process?
Negotiating process.
Yes.
For example, if we compare the number of negotiators in the G7 countries,
yes,
was about double the number of negotiators in 38 poorest countries in the world. But more than that, the story was a story of intimidation and bullying. It was a story where the Haitian and Dominican Republican ambassadors were sent letters before they went to Doha by the US trade representatives basically saying, if you don't sign up to and agree with the government procurement issues, we won't give you the aid package. The issue about export subsidies, the issue about agriculture, the issue about textiles, these are costing developing countries $2 billion a day, the inequitable trade rules. And it's an insult to call this a development round.
The lack of transparency and the bullying used to be much worse. I was in Singapore and I knew about...
But these sort of examples that people phoning...
The bullying is a scandal.
But the example Noreena
yes,
gave...
She's right.
Things like that happen?
But
they do happen.
Yes, but if you don't have a World Trade Organization, if there's no international rule-based system at all, then the poor will lose even more in jungle. So we have to strengthen the rule-based system.
Undeniably, it is a world in which corporations are getting richer and richer, and it's a world in which they're dictating the political agenda in a much clearer way, whether it's on issues of taxation or legislation or regulation. And examples of this would be George W.'s environmental policy, which is clearly made up in the interests of American energy companies, or it would be something like the World Trade Organization, an organization which puts trade interests before human rights, before the environment, before labour standards. So it's a world really in which politicians no longer represent a public interest. And instead what we're seeing as a consequence is an explosion of protest, whether a la Seattle, Genoa, Prague, or what undoubtedly we'll see in Brussels on the 13th and 14th. Perhaps this all is appeasement. It's a matter of, we'll invite her in, we'll give the anti-globalization lobby their 5 minutes in public. If that is all this is, then the people who gathered on the streets and the people who are lobbying actively against corporations, will not be silenced in such a way. And you're always going to be up against, middle-class, middle-aged men who, are really not going to like the fact that there's a young woman challenging their views. I will grab this little moment when the world's media is willing to look at me and hopefully use it effectively to champion things that I think are really important.
We need to encourage our governments to create a world social organisation. This organisation will act to counter the dominance of the World Trade Organization.
Hi, I'm Noreena Hertz. Hi, very nice to meet you. Very nice to meet you. Hello.
At the least, our governments need to cancel debt and reverse the outflows of capital from the south to the north. And we must rethink the ways in which aid is delivered.
THOMASZ. Thank you very much.
All people, wherever they are, must be extended the rights that we in the North take for granted. Multinational corporations must not be allowed to infringe upon these rights, wherever it is that they operate.
Aren't you just yourself becoming a global product that has to be sold all over the world?
Except the difference is there's no multinational company telling me what to do. I can be my own global product. I can have control of my own destiny. And that's something that I hope other people in the world will also be able to have control of all their lives in a global society.